The weapon that requires no ammunition, the force that is steadily pushing Russia toward technological and economic obsolescence, is not a next-generation missile. It is not an autonomous weapon system, a directed energy weapon, or a sophisticated artificial intelligence platform. It is paperwork. More precisely, it is the cumulative weight of over 25,000 individual sanctions that the United States, European Union, United Kingdom, and their allied partners have imposed on Russia since 2014, a campaign that accelerated sharply after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, and reached a new level of intensity in late 2025 when the Trump administration added Russia's two largest petroleum companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, to the sanctions list. These measures did not produce the rapid, spectacular economic collapse that some Western policymakers optimistically forecast in the immediate aftermath of the invasion. But they have accomplished something more methodical, more comprehensive, and ultimately more damaging to Russia's long-term capacity. They have been steadily unwinding 3 decades of Russian modernization. They have forced Russia's industrial and military systems to fall back on inferior substitute components. They have compelled manufacturers to resurrect production methods that had been deliberately abandoned. They have reconnected the Russian economy to Soviet-era industrial practices that the country spent an entire generation trying to escape. And they have produced the most symbolically devastating indicator of economic regression imaginable. Russia is conducting barter trade, exchanging goods directly for other goods, as civilizations did before the invention of currency, because the financial architecture of the modern global economy has been systematically closed to it, when money stops working. The return of barter trade is not an anecdotal curiosity. It was documented by Reuters in September 2025, corroborated in Kiev Post analysis from January 2026, and confirmed by multiple independent economists tracking Russia's cross-border commerce with China and other trading partners. Russia is increasingly turning to direct commodity exchanges to conduct international business precisely because the mechanisms through which modern trade is normally settled have been cut off. The historical resonance of this development will not be lost on older Russians. Barter trade was a defining feature of post-Soviet economic life in the 1990s, a period of hyperinflation, currency instability, and state dysfunction so severe that factories exchanged their output directly for the raw materials they needed. And workers received compensation in the products their employers manufactured rather than in wages they could spend. The 1990s barter economy was one of the most viscerally remembered traumas of the post-Soviet transition, and reversing it was one of the explicit promises of Vladimir Putin's early presidency. Its return now, not as a consequence of state collapse, but as a consequence of state aggression and the international response to it, represents a profound and humiliating reversal. To understand how abstract financial instruments generate such a concrete outcome, one must follow the chain of consequences that begins with SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, which serves as the messaging backbone through which the world's banks coordinate international payments. When Russia was removed from SWIFT following the 2022 invasion, it lost the primary mechanism through which international commercial transactions are financed. Under normal conditions, a Chinese firm purchasing Russian crude oil sends payment through its bank via SWIFT to the Russian seller's bank. The cargo ships, the funds clear, and the transaction concludes. Without SWIFT access, that sequence breaks down. Russia and its partners must improvise alternatives, and every available alternative is slower, costlier, less reliable, and more operationally complex than the system it replaces. The alternative that has become most common is barter. Russia delivers oil. China delivers manufactured goods. No money changes hands in any currency that Western financial controls can reach. The transaction is formally legal under both nations' domestic laws. It bypasses the dollar-denominated financial system entirely. Within its narrow parameters, it functions. But barter is a profoundly inefficient economic mechanism. Economists describe its fundamental weakness as the requirement for a double coincidence of wants. The two parties must simultaneously want what the other is offering in mutually agreeable quantities at the same moment in time. When those conditions are not naturally met, when Russia needs precision engineering equipment, but China's current export surplus is in consumer electronics, or when China wants agricultural commodities, but Russia can only offer industrial metals, the transaction requires complex multi-party negotiation, timing adjustments, and intermediary arrangements. The automatic price setting and matching functions that a normal market performs instantly and costlessly must instead be replicated through laborious, case-by-case negotiation. The result is a trade system that is cumbersome, non-transparent, and structurally less efficient at every level. The semiconductor deficit and its consequences. The barter economy, visible and symbolically significant as it is, represents only the surface layer of a deeper technological regression happening inside Russia's factories, weapons production facilities, and research institutions. The more consequential deterioration is occurring in the widening gap between the technological inputs Russia previously had access to and what it can now obtain. Russia's defense industry, and increasingly its civilian manufacturing sector, depends fundamentally on semiconductors. These microchips govern the function of missile guidance systems, vehicle engine management systems, communications equipment, industrial automation, and countless other applications across both military and civilian production. Before 2022, Russia sourced its semiconductors primarily from Western manufacturers, American, European, Taiwanese, and South Korean firms operating at or near the global frontier of chip fabrication capability. Sanctions terminated those supply relationships. Russia turned immediately to China as the alternative supplier. Chinese semiconductor manufacturers do produce chips, and China has been willing to sell them. The problem is that Chinese domestic chip production, in most categories relevant to precision defense electronics and advanced manufacturing, lags behind the global frontier. China's most advanced domestic fabrication currently operates at 7 nanometer process geometry, capable by any reasonable standard, but behind the 2 nanometer processes that Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company deploys for the most demanding applications. Russia's own domestic semiconductor manufacturer, Micron, produces at 90 nanometer process geometry, a technology level the global industry surpassed approximately in 2004. This technological gap manifests directly in the quality of weapons Russia is now producing. Analysis of the Izdeliye-30, Russia's newest cruise missile documented in combat deployment in 2026, revealed that its navigation and guidance electronics are less sophisticated than its warhead system, meaning the delivery mechanism is less precise than what Russia's design specifications called for. Russia is building missiles whose guidance capability falls short of what should be achievable with its manufacturing base, because the precision electronics that high-quality guidance systems require are not available at the specified quality level. Russia has attempted to fill this gap through parallel import networks, routing restricted components through intermediary countries in Turkey, India, the United Arab Emirates, and Central Asia. But parallel imports are more expensive, supply inconsistent, and increasingly constrained as Western enforcement agencies identify and sanction each intermediary network as it is discovered. Cars without airbags. The civilian automotive industry offers the most straightforward illustration of the technological regression that sanctions have imposed on ordinary Russian manufacturing. By 2021, Russia's major vehicle manufacturers had integrated contemporary Western automotive electronics throughout their product lines. Digital engine management systems, airbag safety systems, anti-lock braking, modern driver information displays. When Western component suppliers terminated their relationships with Russian manufacturers following the invasion, replacement sourcing through alternative channels proved impossible to arrange quickly enough to maintain normal production. The industry's response was to strip the technology out and revert to simpler, older designs. Russia's Lada vehicles, not previously renowned for technological sophistication even by Soviet-era standards, were produced in versions lacking airbags, electronic stability control systems, and emissions management equipment that had been standard in the pre-2022 product line. Russia was manufacturing cars with design specifications equivalent to those of the 1980s because the 2020s components were no longer accessible. This is not a marginal technical difference. Airbags, stability control, and emissions management represent 40 years of automotive safety and environmental progress. Their removal is a measurable, quantifiable step backward in the sophistication of goods that Russian consumers are now purchasing. The same regression pattern replicates across industrial machinery, medical equipment, aviation components, and computing infrastructure. Russia previously imported the high-precision machine tools that its factories use to produce components to tight tolerances. Those tools came predominantly from Germany, Japan, and the United States, the countries that dominate global precision industrial equipment manufacturing. German and Japanese machine tool producers cut off Russia following the invasion. American suppliers had already been subject to earlier restrictions. Russia's factory floors are now running equipment that is aging beyond its intended service life, maintained without access to the spare parts, servicing networks, and technical support that the original manufacturers provide. The component tolerances achievable with 20-year-old machinery under deferred maintenance are demonstrably lower than those achievable with current generation equipment, and component tolerance directly determines the quality, reliability, and precision of every weapon system, vehicle, and industrial product Russia manufactures. What GDP doesn't measure, the aggregate economic statistics present a picture that appears more stable than the underlying technological reality. Russia's gross domestic product has continued to show positive growth, sustained by defense expenditure that registers as economic activity, even though it produces weapon systems that are destroyed, rather than goods and services that improve living standards or productive capacity. Budget deficit figures, growth percentages, and employment statistics reflect the activity of an economy on a war footing, one in which government spending on military production props up aggregate output metrics, while the technological capability and productive sophistication of the civilian economy deteriorate in ways that those metrics do not capture. The indicators that reveal what the GDP figures conceal are the concrete product-level regressions: the barter trade, the cars without airbags, the missiles with degraded guidance electronics, the factory floors running machinery a decade past its intended service life, the commercial aircraft maintained beyond manufacturer specifications with unapproved components. These are measurements not of economic activity, at which Russia continues to score positively, but of economic modernity, which is declining in measurable, systematic, and compounding ways. The long-term structural damage. The dimension of the sanctions effect that most concerns economists focused on Russia's position beyond the current conflict is the structural damage that has accumulated since 2022, damage that would not be quickly reversed even in a hypothetical scenario in which a negotiated ceasefire led to gradual sanctions relief. The highly skilled professionals who left Russia following the invasion, estimates of educated immigrants range from 500,000 to 800,000 individuals, relocating primarily to Georgia, Armenia, Israel, and Western Europe, are not returning quickly. The engineers, programmers, scientists, and technical specialists who departed have, in most cases, established professional and personal lives elsewhere. Their skills left with them, and their absence creates gaps in Russia's technical workforce that cannot be filled by policy decree. The machine tools running beyond their service life cannot be restored to specification by purchasing new Western equipment after sanctions are lifted. The political constraints on re-engagement with Russia's industrial sector will not dissolve quickly, even in a post-conflict environment. The oil field infrastructure that degraded without proper servicing and technology support has lost productive capacity that requires years of sophisticated intervention to recover. And the semiconductor gap, the distance between Russia's 90-nanometer domestic production capability and the global frontier at 2 nanometers, has been widening every year that Russia has been cut off from the technology transfer and capital investment that closing it would require. The shockingly simple conclusion: Russia is not in the literal Stone Age. Acknowledging the hyperbole in that framing is a requirement of honest analysis. Russia retains nuclear weapons, a functioning if degraded military establishment, energy reserves that the world continues to purchase, and a government capable of making and implementing policy decisions. But the direction of travel, from an integrated modern economy toward a sanctioned, technologically regressing, barter-conducting, airbag-removing, guidance chip substituting, machine tool extending, aviation cannibalizing isolation, is unmistakable, sustained, and accelerating. The weapon that has produced this trajectory is also, in a crucial sense, the simplest weapon ever deployed against a major military power. It requires no rare materials, no advanced manufacturing capability, no research and development pipeline, no soldiers, no risk of combat casualties, and no advanced technical expertise to operate. It requires only sustained political will from the governments that control the architecture of the global financial system, and that will has proven more durable, more coordinated, and more comprehensive in its effects than Russia's strategists anticipated when the invasion was planned. A military campaign designed to achieve comparable degradation of Russia's technological and industrial capability would have required years of sustained airstrikes against specific facilities, continuous intelligence operations to identify and prioritize targets, weapon systems capable of reaching them across defended Russian territory, and a political willingness to risk direct military confrontation with a nuclear power. Sanctions achieve a comparable, and in some respects more thorough degradation without a single shot fired, without a single life risked, and through a mechanism that becomes more sophisticated over time as enforcement agencies identify and close each successive workaround Russia develops. Every parallel import network that Western agencies identify and sanction eliminates another channel through which Russia could access restricted technology. Every Chinese bank that restricts its Russia exposure in response to secondary sanctions pressure deepens Russia's financial isolation. Every oilfield services contract that an international firm declines because of reputational and legal risk widens the gap between Russia's extraction technology and the global frontier. The invasion of Ukraine was premised in part on Russia's belief in its own technological and military superiority relative to its neighbors, and on the assumption that the Western response would be insufficiently coordinated and insufficiently sustained to impose serious costs. 4 years later, the barter trade has returned, the cars lack airbags, the missiles have degraded guidance systems, the machine tools are running past their service lives, the aircraft are being cannibalized for parts, The regression continues, not with explosions, but with the quiet, methodical compounding force of 25,000 pieces of paper applied with sustained political will by the countries that built and continue to govern the architecture of the modern global economy. Russia invaded Ukraine to demonstrate its power. The result has been the systematic dismantling of the modernity it was supposed to be demonstrating.